start with these ash trees. There's 5. These were the first plants on the farm to have biochar. Quite simply, I tipped it over the fence. See what would happen. The one on the right, that one at the time was half dead. You would have said he had 12 months to go and he would have been total toast. Since then, there's still the ash dieback trying, but it's the tree is on top of it. And one of the thing that biochar does for ash dieback, I've come to realize, which is it in its root zone. So all you need to do to keep your trees more healthy is to feed the microbial biome, and then after that it allows the tree to get its own resilience to pests and diseases. Not every tree will be resilient, some will succumb, but it's turned, I would say, from a 30% survival, 75% fatality, to a 70% survival and a 30% mortality. And all of the ash trees on this little coppice here on the outside have had biochar, and the ones in the middle haven't. And as we walk back through, you'll see the difference of how many have died on the inside and how many have survived on the outside. And it is that simple. But that same situation is the same for all our crops that we grow, the grass, the clovers, everything is the same. It's about the biochar in with the cattle manure, because we only got cattle, but chicken would be the same. I call it biochar-amended farmyard manure. Is massively more beneficial to your land than just plain farmyard manure. If you ask me, what do you think would be the uplift? I say probably 35% more plant growth from the same farmyard manure than if you just put farmyard manure on its own. But we are very specific how we put the biochar into the cattle bedding, which we'll go into a bit later. So we'll just carry on a little bit further and we'll stop by the orchard.
How much do you put on?
On these, they probably had the equivalent of 100 tonne an acre, because it's quite easy to tip a bucket full. It was a case of how much can I put on and will it kill them? Well, you can see it hasn't killed them, but it's got about that much biochar on the, so it's totally over the top. But it does not need anything like that amount. It was total waste, but it's proved a point. You cannot put too much on. But biochar.
Yeah.
I would say what I do is I look at how much biochar I want to put in our bedding to soak up all the nitrogen, the urea that's produced by the animals. So it's a little bit, how much biochar do I need per animal, as opposed to how much do I put on per hectare. Then I've got the manure, and then I decide how much of that I want to put on per hectare, whether it's 4 tonne, 5 tonne or 10 tonne, depends. Is the land fertile? How much manure I've got? What can I do? Have I bought some more in? Etc. But it is literally, you can put up to 1 tonne a hectare quite easily, but I don't think you need anything like that. Probably, if you think last year we put 6,000 pounds worth of biochar into our bedding, that's about 10 tonne of biochar, and it's going to be spread over between 30 and 40 acres. So it's roughly 200 to 300 kilos per acre actual biochar is what our land is getting now. However, when we first started 4 or 5 years ago, I probably put the equivalent of 1 tonne a hectare for the first year, which actually boosted the carbon and got everything moving. Now it's a little bit like keeping the plate spinning. Any other questions?
Yeah, how much do you think you can reduce it to maintain the stability of the productivity of the soil?
Again, it's not so much reducing the biochar down to how much I can reduce it to, it's how much can I reduce it in the cattle environment, to actually absorb all the urea that we want.
Yeah.
If I put too little, I won't absorb enough.
Yeah.
and I'm still a journey I don't know. I mean, I would say that if I reduce it to a level when I could start to smell ammonia again, then I've gone too far. Okay?
Just thinking after time with neighbours that don't have cattle but are interested in taking material, once you've got achieved soil stability, you're going to need an additional place to put your outputs if you're maintaining the healthy level in your cattle shed. So I was just wondering if there was a kind of tapering effect over time.
I believe you'll just be literally, it will get less and less, but you just find a level that is right. It's economic balance. You just got to work out how much you're going to allocate to biochar and how much is that going to say offset the cost of feed and fertilizers. And then if you find a balance and you get your right balance of everything growing, you find a balance. I don't know where it is. I mean, I'm only 5 years in it, and it probably take another 10 or 15 years to even begin to get a balance. But I would prefer to put too much on than too little.
Yeah.
Because if you put too little, you will not get the effect. If you put too much, you will not get a negative, and I'll explain that when we get to the field. Right, well, this year being somewhat dry, even the soil microbes can't keep things going. We had a first cut and a second cut, which is 20-30% down at least on last year. We are still confident that even though this looks really bad at the moment, that as soon as we get rain it will come to life and we will get a real good flush of grass in September, and we should take a last cut end of September, beginning of November, and that will hopefully top us up what we need. What is very interesting is that we know the drought is bad because the docks are even not growing, and I've never seen it in all my years before where the docks have not actually grown in this sort of conditions. And what is interesting, this is being helped by a big increase in the dock beetle suppressing the docks. So our major grassland weed issue, and I don't really consider dock to be that detrimental because it still has good feed value in limited amounts, and we got a good clover content, so we will have a good nitrogen base in this sward. But this year has been a disaster for us as far as growth compared to the last 4 years, simply because we're at about 700 feet here, so we're marginal land. East is that way, north is that way, and we only had east and northerly wind through January, February, March, then no rain in April. So it was pretty tough. This side of the field had no grass, the other side was 3 to 4 times the crop, and that's just sometimes what you're up against in farming. And I don't think it would have made much difference what we'd done to it. My mistake, and I'm not perfect, I made a big mistake last year, only applied half the amount of manure to this field than I normally do. So it didn't have enough resilience coming out of winter to give us a good flush of grass we should have had. So that's a mistake I made. And one of the takes I've taken from that now is that we will put all our manure that we have available on in September, October. It's what I discovered, it's a waste of time keeping it to the spring, because I did apply what I didn't put in autumn to this in the spring. But because we're relying on natural nutrient cycling, there's not enough time for the nutrients to be repurposed for the plants to take up. If you apply it in the spring, it needs to be in the autumn. You won't lose it because it's in the soil microbiome, and in the biochar it will not leach out over the winter. It'll just grow more winter grass, but the sward will be ready to go in the spring. And we are really now focused on, typically we're looking to cut on the first week of May to second week of May, seeing a sward this high, and that gives us the bulk of what we need. But yeah, it's a tough year this year. One of the other things that's happening is this is a long term, this is going to have hemp on it next year. So I'd say we've finally exhausted this sward. Well, when you think it was a 2-year herbal lay planted 12 years ago, it kept going pretty well, and it yielded very well last year, but it's finally got to the point it definitely needs a reseed. So we're going to probably double our acreage of hemp next year and do 20 acres on this field, which will be quite interesting. So we'll move on now and we'll go back through the woodland. And yeah, any questions?
Is it better, do you find, in the test, whether you're applying it with manure and spreading it on the surface, or whether you're putting it part of your cultivation?
Well, on grassland it's always on the surface, and I would always apply biochar-amended manure. I wouldn't be looking to apply biochar on its own, because if you apply a biochar, you still need to feed microbes. You've got to feed them nitrogen. And if you don't feed them nitrogen, you won't get the soil biology working. But they need to be fed nitrogen in the organic form, particularly in a form of ammonium, which is resilient. It doesn't leach out of soil, but it's what your soil microbes use, and that sets a symbiotic relationship between clover and the soil microbe. And then once that starts, it self-perpetuates. As long as you get that clover self-perpetuation going, you'll get all the growth you need right through the season. If you miss the boat like we did this year, then we're not seeing the growth we should do. But interestingly, I think the red clover, which would have been a lot more resilient to the drought, is pretty near died out. And I think it's down to the point we've now got possibly a build-up of the red clover root weevil or something. There's something that eats them anyway. But they've got some interesting. Just to have a rest with the other at the Royal Welsh Show, and they've now got a new red clover that's come out that doesn't suffer that. So that'll be really interesting. I think it'll be a real new toolbox in the toolkit to actually keep strong regenerative growth going. Any other questions?
Will you cultivate here, or will you direct drill or cultivate?
This? No, when I come to the conclusion that from now on we're going to do a 5-year rotation, so we can keep our herbal lay going for 5 years. So we look to establish a herbal lay with good diversity, in view of it being every 5 years, being ploughed, crop of hemp, reseed. Because I don't see how you can get a really good reseed and regeneration of all the life you want without ploughing. We've tried to do it with no cultivation, and the only way I can see to do it without any cultivation is Roundup, and we are not using Roundup. But I also think it's not a bad thing to actually turn microbiology upside down and then encourage it to come back new and invigorated. We will see after the hemp crop. This time next year we'll have some real better data on that, but I anticipate what we see on the reseed after the hemp, after the plough, will be really positive, because the hemp roots will have broken any compaction layers, and they'll do like carbon highways down into the soil structure. So our rooting for the sward should be a lot deeper and a lot established. Right, where you're standing, there's plenty of forage, but that's because it's wet. We've got a broken drain, so this is a big damper part of the field. It's actually a fertile part of the field because it's got good depth of soil, but it's also got its own water supply. Now, one other little comment was our hedges. We've decided to do a complete new, it's probably not new, but you don't see it very often. We're going into coppiced hedgerow. So instead of cutting them every year, we're planning to cut them every 4 to 5 years, maybe 6, on the basis it'll be economic to cut them and use it for biochar. In the meantime, as you can see, there's far more berries and food for the birds. Berries is huge. We get massively more blossoms in the spring and summer for the bees. So we think it's a real nice way of adding to nature, but doing more carbon sequestration and actually giving us some fuel for the biochar. Only problem is I haven't worked out what machine we need to do it yet, so we might have to build one. This little copse we planted in 2003, just before we realised or had any knowledge that ash dieback was going to be a big issue. So it was probably 75% ash that we planted in this area. And yeah, the ash dieback has taken its toll and still is taking its toll, as you can see. There's one there that's pretty near dead, another one here very dead. So we're going to lose probably another 40% of what's in this wood of ash. However, there's been a lot of natural regen. There's a lot of oaks coming through, and we planted some other species. So as the ash die out, other species will take over. And like I said before, I'm too lazy. No, I just don't have enough time to carry biochar in here and put under these trees. They'll just have to take their chance. But it's just nature in its own way. It's self-regenerating. But what is interesting is we still have all our larch trees. We haven't taken any out. I think we've lost 2 to 3 with the I can't remember the name where larch dies, but you've got the Forestry Commission. Oh, you've got this larch, you've got to cut it down to stop the spread. If they knew I had these larch trees here, they'd be probably pressing me to cut them down. There's no way I'm going to cut them down until they die, because I don't believe cutting a tree down to stop a spread. It doesn't work. You've got to accept the spread, cut them down as they die, and then the ones that survive will be the future for that species. And it's the same with the ash. I mean, I would say that ash has every chance of surviving and growing through this ash dieback phase. And the one behind there, that one as well. So there's plenty of ash will survive in this wood, but that's how nature makes its selection. And with the addition of biochar, all we're doing is helping nature along. We're not actually doing anything radical. We're doing because one of the very interesting things I did in this woodland was we got a microbiometer where you can measure the microbial level, and microbial levels should be quite high in woodland area. But when we actually did the test in this wood, it was quite low. It was on probably 300 micrograms. Arable's about 200. That field is between 500 and 800. And it's because the microbial level is quite low in this area why it's suffering quite a lot with ash dieback. But this field is very wet and very poor ground. That's why we planted it. Now, if any of the ash on the farm is growing in real good fertile ground, they're not affected by ash dieback, very little. But that comes down to the amount of carbon that is already in the ground. So it's a situation with tree diseases. It's all down to if you can fertilize your microbes, they'll survive. But we haven't seen any effect with Dutch elm disease at all. I've tried putting biochar mix on some elm trees that were dying and they just died. So it's like biochar is not a fix for everything, but it helps the tree become resilient to some things.